Let's go.
Welcome to the Trusted Leader Show. I'm your host, David Horsager. Join me as I sit down with influential leaders from around the world to discuss why leaders and organizations fail, top tactics for high performance, and how you can become an even more trusted leader. Welcome to the Trusted Leader Show. It's David Horsager, and I have a special guest. She's a dear friend. It is Dr. Kimberly Harms. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for asking me.
Yes. So if you don't know Dr. Kimberly, she was the first woman president of the Minnesota Dental Association. She is practicing, and she's been director of dental facilities and organizations all around. She has some other things we're going to talk about, though. And she really, she's written books on really grief, emergencies, mediation. One of her books is Neutralize Your Nightmare, about kind of mediation and conflict. We're going to talk about that. And Emotional Emergency Handbook, really creating a safe environment in the midst of emergencies and big challenges that we all face. And I think they're all very important for leaders. We're also going to touch on, outside of, being a doctor and all your expertise as both a leader and dentist and doctor, you've also have some experiences I think that can speak to all of us, and that is loss and grief and challenge. And, we've all had, whether we're losing an employee or losing a family member, right? Or all these things. So she lost her mother too early. Tragically, she lost her brilliant, amazing son to suicide, and she lost her husband too early, and among other things. But she can speak to this in a real way. So once again, I just want to kind of set you up. There's so much more to who you are, Dr. Kim. But anything else that you would say sets us up, like we should really know this about Dr. Kim before we get into the conversation?
Well, I think I worked in quite a bit in my profession of dentistry in my first life. And I had a unfortunate radiculopathy, or I had some nerve damage in my drilling fingers of all places. And so I had to kind of come into a second career. And my daughter, Hillary, both my daughters are attorneys, and they went into dental law. So I'm working now for them in the area of dental transitioning from one purchaser, one owner to another owner. And I work with offices managing grief when they're going through some sort of a catastrophic loss. If every organization has somebody going through a catastrophic loss at some time or another, and if you haven't gone through one yet, you're either going to die first or lose somebody that you love. So this is a universal concept. In fact, we're kind of going through a global grief right now with this pandemic. So I talk about grief and loss and conflict management within the professions, dental and otherwise.
I want to get into that because I want to end up with some aligned work that we both love in East Africa and we're passionate about. But let's jump into this. We've been this pandemic, this endemic now maybe. This lots of loss, lots of grief. We can't get everything out of all your books out of this, but I think we should talk about it because leaders need to understand this. And yet, what I see the challenge for leaders, at least, is they're grieving. Their team is grieving, and they also have pressures from the top to provide and drive the bottom line to be around in next quarter. So, there's this big push for certainly humanness and give people time off and take time off and take care of yourself, and yet they're also like, and I have to meet the quarterly earnings or whatever, So how can we think about that as leaders, loss and grief right now? What would be your advice?
I think one of the most important things that leaders can do right now is learn how to lead their team through grief, because it's a pandemic of grief right now. And many times we believe that our goal is to accomplish the goals of whatever our business is, and we focus on that. And we kind of think the emotional issues just take care of themselves, but they don't. They don't. The emotional issues that are going on amongst our team members, the other people that we're working with, affect their performance, their productivity, and our ability to manage those emotional issues has a huge effect on team loyalty and their ability to stay with us. We've got some issues globally with employment. There are not enough employees to fill all the jobs that we need them to fill. And I think one of the best ways you can help them is be loyal is manage them through grief.
So let's get to a couple tips of how can I actually lead my team, or help kind of lead them through grief.
Well, the first thing you need to do is, I believe you need to include emotional emergencies, which I call anything that's going to emotionally affect what we do. We need to have a plan, just like anything else. How many of you have bereavement plans in your work? How many days can someone take off paid or unpaid if they have a loss? Has to be kind of consistent. I really believe that we need to talk about grief. If someone's going through a difficult time, we need to have a team meeting, maybe even before they come back, to find out how we're going to help them. And then when they get there, ask them how you can help them. You need to understand that when you're going through grief, you might have waves of grief that come back after the funeral's over and you come back to work. You're not all right. Typically, if it's a catastrophic loss, you're not all right. So we need to have something within our teams where we work together to help that person get through those times when they have a wave of grief that hits them. You have a lot of post-traumatic stress that comes back and things they might be going through their day, and all of a sudden something reminds them of their lost loved one, and bam, they get hit. I had in our office, we had like a crying room upstairs in case somebody needed to just take a moment after a tough time. And, you have a little Visine in the room, little makeup remover, where you can get yourself back together and have a plan with the team that if that person has to take a moment, that the rest of the team kind of covers for them. But you have to plan for those things.
Yeah. What about people that say, I've seen this in leaders and colleagues. Okay, someone has a catastrophic loss. They really, the rest of the team cares about that person, but they don't know what to do. They're like, should I talk to him? Shouldn't I talk to him? I'm not an expert counselor. I feel like I would do the wrong thing, so then they don't say anything. What about the team? What should, or the leader that's kind of they're a fast-paced tech company. How do they pause enough, and what do they do to help it be okay? Or how do they ask the right questions, or how do they be present in the right way?
It's interesting. C.S. Lewis has a great quote, something to the effect that maybe we should isolate people that are grieving to a special colony like lepers, because nobody wants to be around them. Nobody knows what to say to them. They feel uncomfortable. So the first thing to know is, what do you say? What do you talk to? How do you talk to them? Well, I think the first time you see someone, certainly you need to address a loss. Usually that's at a funeral or right after the loss, during whatever officially is going on, to help the grievers get through that. But when they come back to work, the most important thing you can say to them is, I am so glad you're here. It's so good to see you. You need to let them know that you're glad that they're here, and then say, I know you're going through a tough time. If there's anything we can do to help you, if you need a moment, just come to me, have some sort of a signal, some sort of a plan that if you need a few moments, just come to me and we'll help you get through this.
This is great. Address it, and then acknowledging you're glad they're back, given the signal or space. How about you? We've been authentic, you've been open about it, but your son, maybe even start with, actually, I think we should jump to the story of why you started books or working with Books for Africa. And some people don't know this, but Dr. Kimberly was in one of our first cohorts of certified trust edge facilitators. She has her own brilliant work, but she used some of our work even in her work in Rwanda and other places. And but when you lost your son, you felt like you could hardly breathe or move or get up some days. But this kind of goes together with why you started the work in Africa. So maybe we start with that and then come back to your son and maybe some tips on how you've made it through.
Yeah, I lost both my son and my mother to suicide. So that is a very, any loss is traumatic, but that just basically destroyed my world when my son died and brought back all the grief compensated for my mother. And so I was in a very bad place. I didn't think I'd ever be able to have joy in my life again. You can't eat, you can't sleep, all those things. You could just hardly get through the day, but you have to go back to work, right? And as I have a dear friend who was on the board of Books for Africa, and she suggested that we have a library in Rwanda through Books for Africa, a great organization based in Minneapolis, an amazing place. And so we started.
It was because of you, by the way. I'm pretty sure it was because of you originally that we sent our first printings of Trusted ships and books cases. Yep. Yeah, that's what reminded me of your getting certified because of helping us start our work there. So
and we had a group of African leaders that came to Minnesota through Books for Africa, and we gave them all a copy of your Trusted. So it was Africa gets a lot of Trusted, and I actually gave the whole seminar out there back. 7 or 8 years ago, I can't remember even. But she said, let's get one shipment out. And of course, I'm a dentist, so I went to the dental school, and that there was a need for law library there. So we were able to work through Thomson Reuters to get law books. And we just kind of got this collection of 7 libraries on our very first shipment. And what I found, we went out to visit Rwanda. What I found is they are the grief experts of the world. Rwanda had a genocide in 1994, and I went there in 2011, so that was 16 years after the genocide, not a long time. And they had taken their country, even in that short period of time, from a horrible place that was just completely shattered. The organizations and institutions were shattered. It was just a shattered country. And in 16 years, they had built it back to a safe, beautiful place. Kigali was being built up. It was just unbelievable progress in 16 years. Now, what they did is they did it through first of all, forgiveness. How do you forgive a genocide? I don't know how you do that.
And you and I met. I remember about Father Ramey who came over, and it was like you got sibling against sibling, or almost like neighbor against neighbor, right?
Just they'd
been neighbors, and then how do I forgive that person who then sold me out or killed me or my dad or mom?
Yeah, they'd killed the entire families and burnt down all their property, so that any survivors had absolutely nothing, and the families combined. But what they did is they realized that if they didn't forgive and build a new country, that their children would be going through the same thing again, again, and again. And if you look in Africa, some countries that didn't handle things like that so well, they're still in that shape. But Rwanda has built itself up to a point right now where it's as safe as our State Department rates it as safe as going to Canada. It's a safety level 1. So if you feel safe going up to Canada, then you should feel safe going to Rwanda. In fact, when they come to the United States, they get a little worried about safety. But so they built this amazing country up, and I realized that they were the experts in grief, and they helped me so much manage my grief. If they could overcome that, a genocide, losing their entire families, and then I need to learn how they did that. And they did it through reconciliation. They did punish the perpetrators. They were in jail for probably about 20 years. When they came out of jail, they had to face their communities. They had to talk to the victims. They had to try to make some sort of recompense to the victims. They have just an amazing ability to deal with conflict and to deal with grief. And it was such a blessing for me. I'm so grateful I got to go there. And now we have over 40 libraries and over 240,000 books and computers and so on that are there. So we have a whole system built up now, Eric Harms Memorial Libraries, through Books for Africa.
And Eric is your son. And
Eric's my son, yeah.
Yep. And I think that whole process, there is, there was punishment, but there was a way toward forgiveness. And we might come back to some of that. Tell us about your son.
Well, Eric was an amazing young man. Amazing. He loved his family, loved his friends, he loved his God. He went to St. Thomas Academy, which is a school here in Minnesota, and he was the band director, and he made band cool. In fact, some of the football parents kind of complained a little bit because the band got a lot of applause, when Eric was up there, because he would dance. He was called the Dancing Bear, and he was recruited to go to Columbia University. So he went to Columbia, loved it there. He was elected to student government. He was a brilliant jazz pianist, so he was in the jazz band. He was accepted into the jazz program there. And at the end of his first semester, he was on the dean's list in engineering, and he was in love. He had just in love with this young woman, and was on top of the world. And he went back to Columbia, and 2 weeks later, 45 minutes after his girlfriend broke up with him, which is she should have done if she didn't love him the same way, he took his own life. 45 minutes. That brilliant, impulsive brain that was great at jazz piano was not able, and he didn't have his full brain developed in the area of rational thinking. So he just impulsively took his own life. And it just absolutely was such a surprise and a devastation to his family and all that loved him. He had a big group.
Yeah, he did. An amazing young man. What were some of the things that helped you start to deal with that hole and agony?
Well, I had someone tell me something once, which I think is every parent needs to hear that's lost a child. And you can only tell it if you've lost one yourself or you're in that position. I had a nephew. It was shortly after my husband and I were returning back to work, and we're dentists. You have to grieve in secret. You can't grieve when you're doing that fine work. I mean, it's a hard thing to do. And we were back at work, and I was coming out of the office one night, and my husband was standing there with his cousin Carrie. And Carrie had lost his brother, Jan, at about the same age, at about 19. Jan had been out drinking. His friends brought him back and left him in his car, thinking he'd just walk in the house. But it's Minnesota. It's 20 below zero, and Jan froze to death in his car outside of his parents' home. And Carrie was devastated by the loss of his brother, but he felt that he also lost his parents. At that time, he felt that his parents were no longer able to be themselves. And he said to me, and he pointed his finger at me, and this is, I was grieving. I was in the zombie stage. Anyone that's been through catastrophic loss knows that zombie stage where you kind of walk around and you feel like you're dead inside and you're trying to just make it through. I was in the zombie stage, and he looked at me and he pointed his finger at me and he said, "Kim, don't you ever let your remaining kids feel that they are not enough." It was like a lightning bolt. And that was the beginning of my realizing that I had to do everything in my power to crawl, climb, and find my way out of that horrible despair pit. And that was the beginning. And it's a journey. It takes long. Grief is different with every person. But that's when and my husband had just had a liver transplant. He had liver cancer, had a liver transplant. He was struggling, physically and emotionally. And so I had to climb my way out of that pit.
What were some of the rungs of that ladder of climbing out?
Well, first of all, I have a strong faith, and so that my faith helped me get through. But I think understanding the love for my children, the love for my husband, knowing that they needed me, knowing that I could staying in this pit forever is a horrible place to live if you've been in that pit. I didn't want to live there the rest of my life, and I didn't want the people around me to be influenced by my time in the pit. I wanted to crawl out of that and show that you can overcome these things. And it took a long time. I did become a grief counselor actually shortly after that, and I learned one of the things I learned. We all know the stages of grief, but there are tasks to mourning. And I like tasks better because I like to grab onto tasks. The task of mourning are to accept the loss. That takes a long time. And then to take a look at your life as it is, process the grief. Processing is the hard part. That's getting out of the pit, processing the grief. Adjusting to the new world. A catastrophic loss divides your world into before and after, and you have to adjust to the new life. And then find a place to put your loved one in your heart, but move forward in your life and be present for the people that are there. And those tasks were, learning that was important too. So all of that combined, I just made it my goal to get out of the pit. I didn't let the pit overcome me, because it will. I think if you don't fight it, it overcomes you and you're stuck down there in that pit with one nostril sticking out of the mud trying to get through.
At Trust Edge Leadership Institute, we know how difficult it can be to lead a company through change and how debilitating the last couple of years have been to teams. Based on decades of research, we know that to carve the path forward for your people, you need trust. Trust is the key to reignite your company culture. Trust is what will grow your bottom line, and you can't do it alone. What if you could come together with hundreds of leaders from around the world to increase connection, capacity, and also bottom line impact? That's why the Trusted Leader Summit exists. At the summit, you'll surround yourself with C-suite leaders, meet Olympic gold medalists, connect with high performers, and gain tools from global industry experts that you can implement right away to reignite your people. Join us April 12 through 14 at the Mall of America, JW Marriott. If you lead anyone, if trust and integrity matters to you, if you want a high-performing culture, this summit is for you. Get your tickets at trustedleadersummit.com today, and we can't wait to see you there.
Did you have help? I mean, I think I could hear a lot of people saying, okay, that's great, but I am in the pit. I don't know what to do, and I don't feel like getting out. I mean, they're so thinking about themselves. They're like, I know my family, my husband, my wife, my whoever needs me, but I can't, they're going to stay in bed or whatever it is. How did you either fight or did you have help?
I'm a dentist, and one of our problems as dentists is we think we know everything. It's a fatal flaw in me. So instead of going to a grief counselor, I became a grief counselor. So I used education to get myself out of the pit. Now, I had pastors in my church. I have friends, wonderful friends. I have all the things necessary to help me. But I want to say to those people that are under the bed that it is much better even for you if you have no one else in your life but you, that you are enough. And it is so much better to be out of that pit and to be above the ground and to see the light than to be in that pit. It's a horrible place to live. So even for yourself, it's important to climb out of that pit and fight to get out of the pit and have that motivation. I know that not everyone can do it, and I know that there's some people that are there for life. But I would just like to encourage everyone, no matter where you are, to climb, crawl, get yourself out of the pit, and to know that finding joy again in life does not diminish your love for the person that you lost. In fact, I think that that person, if you love that person and that person loved you, they would not want you to be in the pit for life. So no matter who you have around you, for yourself, even climb and crawl out of that pit. It's a terrible place to live.
This is all, there's more about this in Dr. Kim's book, Emotional Emergency Handbook for How to Do This at Work and Deal with It. I want to jump to something else. Before I do, anything else you would say for just how we should address grief in the workplace?
I think it's to address it, let the person know that you're thinking of them, talk to the person one-on-one, even little things like bringing them a coffee in the morning. Show them that you're thinking about them by little deeds, bringing them coffee, do something nice. Those things are really helpful. They just want to know that you care. Also, one thing that I think people don't realize is we love when you tell stories about our loved one. I loved it when people from the band or Quiz Bowl or whatever organization Eric was in would write these stories about how he helped them. I love those stories, and especially in a card, writing them in a card. Sometimes the people that are grieving I don't remember much about that first year. You lose your memory a bit. I mean, your brain's not working. Those cards are fabulous. Write them a card and tell them how much you care about them. A nice story about their loved one. They just need to know you're there.
I love it. How much you care about them and a story about a loved one. I even think of people in my life that have passed away at a reasonable age, 86 or so. My grandma, but I remember I loved hearing the stories about who she was and seeing who, I've got my dad's 92 now, and I just I think keeping telling the story, but especially those young lives that were gone so early that people could quickly not hear or could forget. So Emotional Emergency Handbook, all of this is at thedentalmediator.com. I want to jump over to some insights from your other book. We could talk about all kinds of things today, leadership and dentistry and Rwanda more. We are lined on some things there, but I do want to talk about, because you do have a significant expertise, even in what you're doing now, in dealing with conflict and mediation. And a lot of, obviously, what we talk about is building trust or being trusted even in the midst of certain conflict. We will certainly, we say conflict is inevitable, but maybe you could, let's just take this and look at work a little bit. What are some tips on dealing with conflict? We all have it. There's conflict everywhere in these, whether it's offices or company or teams. What are some things you could share with us to help us stay trusted in the midst of conflict?
The biggest thing right now in our country, for sure, is when there is a conflict, there is a tendency amongst people to focus on the people in the conflict and not the issue itself. Just look at the media when there's even a political issue. Mm-hmm. Instead of looking at the pros and cons of the issue, they start talking about the people, and one side is good and one side is evil. This is kind of how we are doing things more and more in the United States. I think it's a very bad trend, because one of the most important things in conflict management is to focus on the conflict, focus on the issue, take the people out of it, because don't assume people have evil intentions. Just say, here's a conflict, here's the issue, how do we solve it? Find the common ground and work on solving the problem, and get rid of your feelings about the people involved. Focus on the problem.
Great tip, by the way, getting rid of the people. I mean, wouldn't this be amazing in our media and everything else? Ugh. What about mediation? You're having to play the role of mediator. What are some of the key parts of mediating these kind of challenging situations you and I have talked about, or you've had, between offices or future or I'm losing the word with an S. The next passing it on to the next generation. If you're moving leadership to somebody else, everybody's thinking of it for me.
Transition.
Yeah, that's one way.
I lose words too.
Yeah. So how are you dealing with? How are you going to go into mediation? There's fierce bitterness, or that people are against each other. What do you start with?
The first thing I try to do is I get the story from both sides. I get one side, and then I get the other side. And I try to take a look at those stories and find out where the commonalities are. Where is the common ground? I try to get rid of the people and focus on what is the issue? What's the common ground? How can you benefit? How can you benefit? And then get them talking about the issue rather than the people. Now, sometimes you'll find that there might be an issue that comes up. That's not the real issue. There might be an issue that comes up, say, in an office. Somebody gets angry with something in the office. What you might find is that really that's not the full issue. The issue is that 2 months ago, one person felt disrespected by somebody else. And conflict that is not resolved or addressed just metastasizes. So taking care of those conflicts when they're little, before as they build and build and build, and then suddenly there's an explosion and they have to call in a mediator. But it's finding the common ground. It's listening to both sides of the story. It's being a third person that can maybe come in and ask some questions. What are some of your favorite? By the way, the word it just jumped in my head. Succession planning. Succession. When I got succession issues, lots of those happening. Yeah. But what are some questions you like to ask as a mediator? Well, I think the one of the best questions is why do you think that's happening, or what is going on here? Just those basic questions is what do you want to see happen? What if you could pick a resolution, what would your resolution be? And then I would ask the other person, if you could pick a resolution, what would your resolution be? And then
I love that.
It might be similar.
Yeah. It gets them solution-centered about it. It gets them thinking about the solution instead of like, this. It's like, well, what would I really want? Well, maybe it's not such a high bar,
And sometimes it's just respect. I just want her to treat me with respect. That might be it. And then once you get over that hurdle of the lack of respect or lack of trust is huge, because I'm trying to think of a time that I did a mediation where two people actually trusted each other. It's almost like my mediations are there. A mediator is kept busy because of lack of trust, because people assume the worst in other people. Usually people that trust each other will work out a deal themselves. They don't need a mediator to come in. So that's, you'd put us out of business, but
well, there's the cost of a lack of trust. We say a lack of trust is the biggest cost they have. Well, one is a mediator, and that costs time, and it costs money, and it costs all these things. So
and my daughters are lawyers, so they'd be out too. No, they work mostly in good law. They bring people together for transitions and things like that. But yeah, so I think that people that lack trust typically don't need a mediator, or that have trust typically don't need a mediator.
Well, there's a lot more. If you go to thedentalmediator.com, you can find out about Dr. Kim's books, Neutralize Your Nightmare. If you're looking at conflict and mediation, you can also find Emotional Emergency Handbook. And if you're a leader, you need to know what to do. So that's a good place to find that. Find out more. I have loved our friendship, and thank you for making me better. I want to jump in a little bit here to personal because, I found at least that leaders that are leading others and have a voice, and you're speaking on platforms all over, including all the way to Rwanda, that they're leading themselves in some way well. And certainly we're not perfect, but do you have some habits or routines that you kind of do every day? Like I always do this for, whether it's for my mental health, physical health, spiritual health, or other things. Are there some habits that you like, it really helps me on a daily basis as a leader?
For me, the most important habit, and one that I had to work at, is intentional listening. As a mediator, I had to intentionally listen. That taught me how to do that. I tend to try to be a problem solver and solve people's problems before they actually ask me to. So intentional listening, I have to focus on that and intentionally do it.
Love that. What's motivating you these days? You get to work with your daughters here in this kind of later work chapter, and you're having a ball. But are there some things what's next for Dr. Kim, or what are you thinking about and hoping for down the road?
Well, the thing that motivates me most, I have 6 grandchildren. Oh my gosh, life is great with grandchildren. They are the best. And I think that as I look at how the world is going and what I'm doing, they motivate me to just keep on going and being and to remain active and keep healthy, because you can't replace me as a grandma. You can replace me as a speaker, you can replace me to other things, but you can't replace me as a maternal grandmother to those 6 grandkids.
When's your next trip back to Rwanda?
Well, we're planning one maybe in March or June. We're waiting for this whole COVID situation to kind of calm down a little bit. The last time I was there, I think I took one of the last planes out. I was there in March of 2020. Not a good time, but it was great. I had a great time in Rwanda. I brought my niece. We had a wonderful time, but getting out was hard. And they're actually very very careful. Rwanda has a very low prevalence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How many libraries now have you helped?
There's over 40.
Yeah.
Right now we have over 40 libraries, and we just brought in another law library. And I'm working with the dental school. I'm working with a number of dental speakers to go out and give virtual courses there, which is fabulous. With the internet, you can have in virtual courses. It's amazing what you can bring. When you're not even there. It's just fabulous.
I've written on it, as you know, the whole rebuilding of trust in Rwanda, and I just think it's an amazing story of how trust is built when it just such tragic situation of neighbor against neighbor, and there's so much of a great case study they've done, imperfectly as we all are, but we could all learn something from that story.
I think all of our leaders should go there. It should be part of their education. Just send all our leaders over there. Let them have a little talk.
After the genocide, absolutely. Let's do it. Well, Dr. Kim, this has been a privilege. And for everybody out there that wants to know more, it's just Dr. KimberlyHarms.com or thedentalmediator.com. It's the Trusted Leadership. It's the Trusted Leader Show, Dr. Kim. So I always ask the final question, and that is, who is a leader you trust and why?
Well, Billy Graham. I mean, he walked the walk, talked the talk, walked the walk. He was just an amazing leader, and I just trust him more than anybody.
Hey, it has been a treat to be back together, Dr. Kim. This has been the Trusted Leader Show. Until next time, stay trusted.